start. So today, this is going to be coming close to the end of our Theory Thursdays. We've only got a couple left. But the one I'm showing you is a pretty special persuasion model. And the reason I say that is because this is used quite a bit for advertising and marketing influences. So you may have heard of this at one point or another. So if you've taken a comm theory class or a marketing class or an advertising class, you may have heard somebody mention this notion of the elaboration likelihood model. Now, there's two things that are typically associated with the elaboration likelihood model, and you'll see here that there is peripheral processing and central attitude change. And what this means is I'm showing you the flow chart for what the elaboration likelihood model kind of represents, but what it also represents is this notion of it's a dual processing model. So what that means is you have two separate directions in which you can take based on, in this case, something that you're watching. So there is a persuasive communication attempt. You can see that up at the top, where the persuasive communication attempt is doing what it's supposed to do. You are the receiver. The message, whatever it may be, is the persuasive message. And the author can be, pretty much anything technically, but this is typically associated with mass communication, more specifically, usually associated with advertising. So the persuasive communication is just to buy my stuff, buy whatever it is that I am trying to sell. So there's a couple things that work with this, and you'll see again with the peripheral processing and the central processing is that how much do we actually take in when we are given a persuasive attempt. So sometimes we try to pay attention very much to the finer details of it. So we pay attention to things like the fine print. We pay attention to the attributes or the services that might come with a specific product. We're very inclined to pay attention to what's being said. So we go into what's called a central processing route, which you don't really see necessarily on here, but it talks about, how do we assess critically an argument. So if you're watching maybe an address by, the president, let's go back to the debates and how we're supposed to be processing these words that are being said. So we kind of go into every single word that's being said in terms of the arguments, and that kind of leads to our central processing. We are very much honing in on what's being said and the attribution to the main arguments that are being made. So this is a very important thing within attitude change. So again, this is your central processing that you'll be doing. Again, very thoughtful, very thought-driven in this case. Whereas peripheral processing does something a little bit different. And you can see here, right here, is a couple of different examples of where peripheral processing comes in. So you may think of it as the source is an expert. The source is attractive. The use of availability heuristics. So the availability heuristics can be kind of anything, something that brings to your mind quickly. So something that jogs your memory. I don't know if y'all have ever seen the movie Inside Out, the little animated Pixar film that has all the little personifications of emotions in your brain. But what's interesting about it is they make the joke about the triple mint gum. So I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about here. So it's the commercial that the jingle got stuck in your head for some odd reason. It was something that your cognition just sent up to your brain, and for whatever reason you remembered it and it got stuck in your head. So you might have a particular song that gets stuck in your head quite frequently. And if it's a jingle, that's that peripheral processing at work in terms of an availability heuristic. It's that click whir, again, if you will. So this is a very important characteristic that we're dealing with here because, in one way, we can say that a peripheral will not be as critical as the central route because, we're not thinking as much. However, if you look here, peripheral attitude shifts looks into changed attitude is relatively temporary, subject to counter persuasion and unpredictable behavior. The thing that you need to think about with this is, although it's temporary, usually susceptible to counter persuasion, one thing we might want to consider is if I'm an advertiser and just trying to get you to purchase something quickly. So again, if I've got a small jingle, it's going to get inside your head when it comes to gum. It's not going to make that much difference unless there's a strong counter argument. And again, how much do we really think about gum in this case? The other thing you can go into is thinking about need for something. So I was talking to my students about the Facebook dilemma that's going on in terms of information being given away about a person. You know, your conversations are often looked at by people that you don't know, advertisers, for instance. This is the nature of data scraping. It can be a little scary. Anyway, they said, you know, is this the kind of thing where we shouldn't advertise on Facebook? And I typically say, wait for a trend to start in a certain direction, because if you think about it, certain companies will lose stock because of a PR debacle. Think Starbucks, for instance. Starbucks usually has these strange PR debacles, but at the same time, they recover because people still want coffee. And although I can be very susceptible to counter persuasion based on a couple of different things, you know, again, bad CSR, bad PR by Starbucks, it still comes into the fact that I like my coffee, and I like my coffee from Starbucks in this case, or wherever you go. I'm not really saying one way or the other in that regard, but that's, again, that peripheral attitude shift that actually can make a difference depending on how you do it. So persuasive communication comes in. You can process this centrally or peripherally. But there's a couple things that come into why you come into this central process. And you see it's this long flow chart that's being distributed here. So the first two things that we're looking at here are motivation and ability. First and foremost is motivation in terms of personal involvement, need for cognition. How much do you want to be involved with something? So my wife and I, for instance, we like watching movies together. And one of the movies we like watching together quite frequently is The Lord of the Rings. We love watching that particular movie. And for the most part, it's a movie that her and I can fall asleep to because it's 3 hours and we usually start at 8 o'clock watching it. And if we do that, you know, it's the kind of thing that we don't feel guilty because we know what happens. So the need for cognition is typically low. However, when I was watching it the last time, I said to my wife, I was watching a specific spot, and I said, you know, what if Bilbo did take the ring after his 111th birthday? You know, it was kind of a stupid area to talk about, but at the same time, I felt more motivated to process and really go into kind of a fan theory, if you will. So I felt involved. I had a need for cognition, and so I'm motivated to process. So now I've skipped the peripheral processing process, for lack of better words. Now I go into the say, do I have the ability to process? Now it's like there's a line from a movie called Django Unchained where they say something to the line of, you have my interest, now you have my attention. I think that's how the line goes, but I'm not 100% sure. But the ability to process, now I'm focused on this. So I can be motivated. I can be determined to say, I'm going to watch this. Think about it as maybe you watch like a sports game or something. So if you watch March Madness or something, you may be motivated to say, I'm going to dedicate my Thursday and Friday to watching March Madness. Now it comes the ability to process. Distractions can be one of them. So let's say I'm at work watching March Madness, which I shouldn't be doing, but if that happens, you know, people can come into my office, I can get emails, and I will become distracted, and this may kind of take away from my ability to centrally process something. There may be the area of repetition. Have I seen it before? Prior knowledge to it? Do I know things about it? To where I can come back and say, I'm motivated, but at the same time, given this particular subject, it's already repetitive. I already know things about it, or I'm distracted. I'll go back to peripheral processing. So now we're getting into the fact that we're saying we're motivated, we have the ability. What is the nature of the processing? So they look at argument quality, initial attitudes. If it's favorable, um, then I will go into this change of cognitive structure. But if it's not favorable, I'll go back into retain initial attitude. So this is where elaboration likelihood model and I'm just trying to think. It's another. And I don't have it on the board either. Social judgment theory. Excuse me. To where I would say this falls under my latitude of rejection in terms of what I want to listen to. So instead of having favorable thoughts of my latitude of acceptance, I'm going to place this into my latitude of rejection cognitively and retain my initial attitude from the position. And you see, this is actually where some of these areas will end within the initial attitude. So I'll just stop looking at it at this point. I might just change the channel if I have unfavorable thoughts. Wow, kind of jumped the gun on that sentence there. So, but again, if the argument quality is good, if I have good initial attitudes, I have a more favorable thought. So now there's this potential for change in cognitive structure. And this is this one more time where it can go from peripheral processing to central processing. So the time I have to think, the reflection time I have after the fact, these are the kind of things where if I get to sit and think, I can look into what this message is, what that means, and get to a central positive or negative attitude change. So you'll see here, changed attitude is relatively enduring, resistant, counter persuasion, and predictive of behavior. So again, those are the central processing. It is difficult. So I mentioned to y'all that in the beginning of the semester that persuasion is difficult, especially when you have prior attitudes towards something. This is one of these elements to say how difficult it actually is to get to attitude change. You need to say, I'm going to be motivated. I have the ability to process. My nature of the processing is favorable. I have a change in cognitive structure in terms of what's being said, in terms of how I feel about what's being said. Then and only then, according to this model, that I would go into central attitude change. And so this is a major component when it comes to the attitude shifts that you're trying to make out of it. And this is for long-term change. So when I mentioned before that typically it's extremely difficult to be able to change somebody's mind, particularly when they're embedded in certain beliefs, this elaboration likelihood model kind of gives us that notion of what that could be. Now, with that being said, for things like, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a minute. This model isn't perfect, and I'm not going to duck on Petty and Cassiopo for it because I think there's a lot to be said for it. But the only thing is, there actually have been studies that says, what about a sort of source attractiveness when it comes to things like makeup, for instance, where centrally, in terms of favorable thoughts, ability to process, motivating to process, nature of processing, cognitive change of structure, it could be the fact that I want to look better. So again, makeup, for instance, might be a much different thing when it comes to our ability to process. We may process this centrally because we're focused on, again, attractiveness as the goal, if you will, when it comes to, again, things like makeup and that kind of thing. So this is the model, and this is kind of how it works. Again, it's always, every model is going to have its limitations to it, but it's a cool model to think about and talk about when it comes to, again, how difficult it can be to persuade somebody in what limited amount of time you might have as far as a commercial is concerned, for example, to be able to do so. So that's it for today. I won't be giving a lecture on Friday. However, keep on the lookout for your assignment that will be due next Friday. So I'll put up a Dropbox on Monday. And I will continue on with my lectures upcoming next week. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe in the snow. I think it's supposed to snow again on Saturday. But hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday. Thanks.